Good afternoon slash morning slash evening slash middle of the afternoon. Welcome to the internet where time doesn't exist. If you're listening to this live, you're listening to Recruiting EQ, episode number 77. I'm going to continue to be shocked at how many episodes we're at. I'm shocked every week. I don't understand how it's possible, but even more so because it's our month-end sales panel for September, which means that Q3 is basically over. Q3 of 2025, which is the most science fiction sounding year I've lived in for sure. And it's almost over already, which if you're a salesperson like me is like, oh, it's almost over. We have so little time left to get it in. Month-end sales panel is still the most popular thing that we do on this podcast. So we usually have lots of great participation and comments. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, wherever you're watching it, we are not on that same platform as you. So please do comment, give us your questions, ask things to the panel. Love all of that. But understand that we are not on those apps necessarily, so you can't sidebar with us, which is a thing that I've heard people try to do. So yeah, but definitely welcome all of your feedback and so on. The loose topic for the day, very loose topic, but things that I encounter certainly, and I would love to ask the panel, metrics, comp plans, and security. Not cybersecurity, job security. I should have been clear. There's a character limit. I couldn't be clear. Thank you very much to our panelists for being here today. I'd love it if we could go around the room and if you guys could each introduce yourselves and a little bit about what you do for our viewing and listening audience. Let's start with Aisha.
Okay, thanks for having me, Rick. I'm Aisha Abdulatif. I'm the co-owner and head of marketing for Spherion Greater Atlanta in the staffing and recruiting space. So we are the top-rated recruitment firm in Georgia and carry the highest brand reputation on a national level.
Snap. Take that, other.
I had to throw that in there. Sorry, the marketing person in me.
No, that's great. That's a big line right there. Who would like to go next? Gentlemen,
go ahead.
I'll go. Thank you. Very kind of my Italian friend. So I'm Nas. I run a web and marketing agency currently operating all around the world, really. Mainly we focus on a few main niches and a few main things. So 3 niches, like recruitment is a big vertical we serve, outsourcing, and then coaches and consultants. So we help essentially we have a fractional SDR service, so we help salespeople actually kind of book meetings, and then they can take that forward and then go where they need to go to close those sales. So we run that as a service, and then we do a whole bunch of other marketing things that Isha would know as well. So yeah, I'll keep it snappy, and that's a little bit about what we do.
Thanks, Nas. Shall we hit it, Maurizio?
Yeah, man. Maurizio Giaffre. I'm the director of contract staffing for the Americas and Europe at Montreal Associates. So I've been, we'll say IT staffing for just over 9 years. I've been at Montreal Associates for just over 6 now. So yeah, we're a company that operates on both sides of the pond. And we've been around since 1978, but we're still quite a boutique small company. And that's the feel that we try and give to the rest of our clients too.
Awesome. Fabulous. I can hear my cat, whose name is Karen Abramovitz, running around behind me. So I apologize if she decides to disrupt this thing. I may have to let her out. She loves to scratch the door when I'm going live.
She just wants an intro, I think. That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't realize cats could be disruptive on podcasts. I learned something new.
Her name's Karen, like for a reason. She's got that energy. Self-assured, mother of 3, wants to speak to your manager. Like that's her whole vibe, you know? Okay, so let's dive into our episode. And yeah, apologies if Karen starts to get screen time. That's just a thing that may happen. So in terms of this sales panel and talking about sales stuff in general, it's an unprecedented time. I want to say kind of since COVID, right? Like I started doing these things a little while after we were getting out of the COVID boom, because I just kept hearing such diverse things. Some people are like, it's the best time ever. Other people are like, it's doom and gloom. We're all going to be replaced by AI. It's over. Like it's Terminator. It's Skynet. The whole world's over. There's obviously wars raging. There's a lot of complexity out there, and there's economic issues, tariffs, etc. Right? So there's it's a confusing time. When do you use your tools? When do you use AI? When do you not? So like, it feels like I don't envy salespeople who are getting their start now, who don't have a long legacy of core chops they can rely on, you know what I mean, from back before all this madness. And I, in my travels, speak to salespeople who are looking for jobs or who are, you know, whatever, right? Like seeking advice all the time. And so I feel like it is a bit of a mess as to what some of these people have been told, what they think, what they're asking. And I thought it might be good to take this to the panel because you guys are all, you know, hiring managers. You guys all deal with sales, consult on sales, etc. Particularly in staffing, but marketing too, and just business consulting. A lot of people who listen to this are new business owners, entrepreneurs as well, which got super popular during COVID.
Yeah.
It was like in 1991, everybody started a hip hop label. In 2021, everybody started a recruiting agency. That's what they decided to do. But anyway, so I thought I'd take it to you guys. What are your impressions just of the market, high level, even like how sales has changed, or what some of the things you're seeing out there, or how are you guys feeling in general? Big question, I know.
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I think this year in general it's actually been pretty good with respect to sales and whatnot. Like we've done a lot more, like compared to last year. I would say this year has been a lot stronger, just simply with respect to pipeline. But I would say fundamentally a really big focus of myself and my team is making sure, from an organization perspective, we're doing the right things to make sure we can capitalize on all that new opportunity, because there's just like less room for error, right? Clients, I think, I feel like everyone says this every year where it's like, oh, clients are getting tighter with their purse strings this year, but like clients never wanted to spend money they didn't get value from, right? Totally. So maybe this year there's more scrutiny, or as of late, there's been more scrutiny on what different clients are spending on with respect to technology. But my team, just to give you some example, right? There's a wide range of talent that works on my sales teams. I have people who've been in staffing for 1.5 years, and they come from like a real big box name. So they come from a place where there's tons of structure and there are many things that are done for them. There are some people who come from, they've never sold staffing in their life. They've been with me for the past like 4.5 years, but before that they had no staffing experience. We have other people who've sold everything under the sun and maybe just recently got into staffing, right? They have the most life experience, but the least experience with respect to what we actually sell day to day, right? Everyone brings, we have new grads as well. So everyone brings like a different level of value, and it's more about, like from my side at the top end of things, is making sure that everyone's positioned to bring the best skill set that they have to complement everyone else. All right. And that filters down to how we're able to deliver for our clients too. So yeah, pipeline is great, but pipeline is nothing if you can't capitalize on it, in short. And that's what's been a big focus of me this year and what I'm trying to do with my team.
Thanks, Benicio. How about you guys, Aisha and Naz? How are you feeling?
I think to expand on what you were just saying, Maurizio, I agree. You can have a range of skill sets on the back end, but what you bring to the table, you bring to the table a certain attitude and aptitude to be able to understand how to work with different tools and technology for what we're doing here at Spherion. This year has also been a big growth year for us. We're on the cusp of getting a second office in Atlanta opened up to support all of our clients. And from the flip side, when it comes down to our hiring and those strategies, someone that's able to, everyone's going to have a different selling style or a different, personality set, so to speak. But there are certain things that will never change, whether what you were just saying, 1991, 2021, attention to detail, quality of service, an understanding of certain processes, and like I said, tools and technology, being able to implement that, whether you're a college graduate or you have 20 years of experience, being able to apply all of those things and be adaptable, is those are things that you can't teach, and they're also the hardest sometimes to interview for.
Yeah, for sure. Nas, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think I always like to be optimistic. I think it's always a great time. I think you talked about COVID. Obviously, just like barrier to entry has become really low for most positions in general. So obviously you've got AI, your co-pilot, or you've got every tool available to you, which is, they say, PhD level. So I think just the barrier to entry to start a business, to get into recruitment, to start an agency, to put a website, to do all these things has become super, super easy. So naturally, you get a flood of the market because there's more demand outside the supply, right? So there's an oversupply. So that obviously puts friction on partners and people saying, I can do this for cheaper. But the kind of constant thing is reputation, right? If you have a reputation in the industry, or if you're trying to build your reputation with your client base and you're really focused on like one particular vertical. So yeah, I always think always on the side of optimism. In terms of like new people coming into the market, or new salespeople or existing salespeople who are trying to either get the experience. I think that's always the hardest place to start. I don't think it matters whether it's AI age or COVID age. It's always the hardest when you're starting from zero. But also, I think at that point you've got the opportunity to kind of prove something if you've got the thick skin that's needed to last in sales, right? Because you do need a thick skin in sales. So I think from my side, yeah, I think it's a really interesting time. It's a really fascinating time with AI and a lot of different things that it can do for you, and you can touch on in terms of sales, in terms of looking at your metrics and how to analyze reporting, just do all these things that we just didn't know existed 3 years ago. So yeah, I'm very interested and excited to talk more about this subject.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I mean, kind of in general, you guys are pretty optimistic, which is good. I'm glad that we're there, and I'm glad that maybe people are listening to this who are in sales, because certainly I speak to a lot of people who are frustrated or feel confused, and whether they're hiring managers or salespeople, right? Even hiring managers are like, I keep hiring people and they seem great, and with all of our assistants, it's not clicking. Is it just the market? Is it them? So it's a tough time, I think, on everyone when you're not hitting your goals. Here's a comment from somebody as well. Staffing sales is all about relationships, and things have changed in the past 10 years. Yeah, definitely. Understatement. I've noticed a dramatic shift in the past couple of years regarding HR people and hiring managers, decision makers. Virtually everyone I know in the industry says it is virtually impossible to get someone on the phone or get a response to an email. What would your guests suggest salespeople do to get around this relatively new problem? That's a great question. So yeah, before we move on, then let's go around. I have my ideas, but let's go around the room first and see what you guys think. So, like, first of all, I'd love to know: do you guys agree that this is a new, like, there's a new challenge in addition to the normal challenge of getting people on the phone or getting them to respond? And also, what do you guys do to get around that stuff?
I'll go first. I think it's consumer behavior. I think a lot of that is that people are not used to. Like, if you look at your own behavior, I screen my calls regularly unless I know the number, because you just know it's either going to be a scam, maybe someone from China. If you're Chinese, no disrespect, but if someone from China, you're going to get some automated thing. So I think there's a consumer behavior thing that you're just used to doing. Business has changed, or the way you would operate with people has changed. So there's that. I think skills always, like, the harder something becomes, the more in demand that skill becomes. So if you're great on the phone and that's your solid, like, your best attribute, then you should just double down on that skill, because it's very difficult to be good on the phone. It takes years and years in practice. In terms of strategies like tactics, I love LinkedIn. Rick, we met from, I think it was a cold message. I think I reached out to you.
Yep.
And we got on the call, just had a chat, new network. That's different from trying to kind of sell something specifically. But if you're thinking to the previous comment, it's all about relationships. So if you're going with the hard sell, depending on what experience levels that you have or what record you have, like if you've got a better record, like if someone from Nike cold emailed me or cold called me, I would probably sign up with them tomorrow. So it does depend on the reputation as well of what they're selling to you. But yeah, so the tactics is like LinkedIn's an amazing platform, networking, building relationships, going on lives, or getting into the places where your market actually are existing and spending their time and spending their attention. I think that's like the first point of call where you should really focus your energy and mindset.
Yep, absolutely. Guys, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that question and that point. There is a lot of noise now. Everyone has an email marketing campaign. Everyone is doing cold outreach, like what Naz, you were just saying, with what's a scam, what's a real person on the other end. and it does, relationships are more impactful than ever before. In-person networking, if you're great on the phones, that should translate to meeting someone face to face, and personalizing your outreach too in a way that adds value. I get cold outreach all the time that I'm always curious to see. Don't send me an email saying, I noticed you follow Invest Next on LinkedIn. Let's talk. That's
Right.
not relevant. But I think understanding how to personalize your outreach, to connect it back, to show this is not just a mass email or a mass call. I truly know your organization. I'm curious, is this your pain point, or is this a way, that we could add value, and positioning it that way, and just keeping it short and sweet too. Oftentimes salespeople will put so much in that initial outreach. This is just more of a curiosity. We just want to have a discovery call. We don't even know if this is the right fit, right? And to approach it from that way, in the sense of, how can you stand out from the rest? And I think that's when it comes down to the personalization. And if you don't have a relationship or a connection that makes sense, then you have to kind of create it. And go about it in that way. There's obviously so many ways to automate sales and marketing now. However, nothing takes away from that human element of, I noticed X about your company or your role, and I would like to share Y, and connect those dots.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think a big part of what you just said, Aisha, with there's a lot of people, I think, who are trying to get just like real quick wins, in a sense where they're relying on mass automation and whatnot to try and move some of this stuff. But for me, like the way that and we're going to talk about this when we get into metrics too, right? Is the person who just said that comment, sales is all about relationships. Of course, right? Relationships, you can speed them up with an individual meeting that goes very well, right? So one meeting could be worth like a year's worth of back and forth emails, like face-to-face meeting as an example. But either way, it takes time and effort to get to that point, right? Where you now have that relationship where you can extract information that your competitors don't have, right? And then act on that information by making sales that directly attacks your customers, directly connects with your customer's business problem, right? So all of that takes time, all of that takes effort, but all of that also takes organization, right? When you look at, and I'm not sure what the person who made that comment, how many calls they're making a day and how they organize those calls, right? But if you call one person once a quarter, you can't really, like, do we really know that it's hard to get people on the phone? You call person 4 times in 1 year? Like, I don't know, right? There are people who I've called every month for 2 years and I finally got them. If I were to call them 24 times in 3 months, would I have got them sooner? Maybe, right? But it kind of depends on what your organization needs from you, who they need you to sell to. If you know for a fact that, for example, the phone numbers you're calling are bad numbers, well, I mean, calling them more isn't going to help you get anywhere, right? So that's number one, quality of data, right? But, and for me, like my favorite approach is making phone calls. But, if I don't get that person on the phone, there's at least 5 other ways that I can take a shot at this person, whether it's a traditional email, whether it's a LinkedIn message, it could be a LinkedIn voice note, could be a WhatsApp voice note. I've done this where I've sent personal videos, 30 seconds to the person on LinkedIn. And the next time I call, or whenever eventually I get them, like, oh, you're that guy who sent me that dumb video. Okay, yeah, okay. Tell me, 5 seconds what you want from me, right? But you got it at that point. So for me, a lot of this is around organization and cadence, right? And how well organized your business development is across all, we'll say, like the omni-channel approach of trying to get someone in a meeting. Because that's really, if everything is cold, that's what you want, right? You want a chance to have their undivided attention for 20 minutes, 15 minutes at the very least, right? To tell them why you can add value. So to answer that person's question directly, if you know your numbers are good, it could be a question of organization of your business development itself. And I can only answer that further if I saw that person's plan.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'd love to maybe expand on that as a group too. Like the question of no one answers the phone is interesting, right? Or like answers an email, because the question to me is, if if it is truly cold and you're calling someone cold, it's weird that you would expect them to answer the phone. Like you said, just human behavior. Like it is a little strange. So right off the bat, it's like, how do you warm it up? Well, there's lots of ways you can do that. You can engage with someone's content on LinkedIn. You don't even need to be connected to them to do that, right? You can look at their posts and whatever else. There's a lot that you can do to sort of be present. And then for your own personal branding, I think that you need to talk about your interests or whatever you're good at, right? Like you mentioned it, Aisha and Naz as well, right? You have to be good at, find out what you're good at and then sort of lean into that. But I think to your point, Maurizio, you need to use every single touch point imaginable. You need to have an email, a phone call, an audio message on LinkedIn, a voice note, a video, whatever, right? In order to get people now. But you can do that and you can do it easily. It's not a bad thing. Like, I think it's a good thing. So you can make it warmer. And then when the thing that you're good at pops up, which hopefully should be a meeting, really, right? Like that should be your best thing, is you got to be good at meetings. But you know, you can time these things well, so you're not calling the person before they have any clue who you are. You can put yourself in front of them a little bit first, and then they might be like, I recognize this name or whatever. At least it increases your chances a little bit, right? But you need, how many touch points are you guys seeing? You know, there was stats flying around LinkedIn. There's this guy, Richard Vanderblom. I don't know if you know him. European guy who releases this report on like algorithmic stats from LinkedIn. And at some point he had mentioned something along the lines of, I think 11 touch points was what it was to get somebody in a meeting. That feels high for me personally, but I feel like it's at least 5. I don't know. What do you guys, how do you deal with this kind of idea?
Yeah, I think I don't really have that data, but like off the bat, to be honest.
That's
but
fair.
Like we do a lot of follow. So we do a lot of cold outreach for our clients, so on behalf of recruiters. So I can talk to that data. But often it's the 5th follow up. It's around the 4th or the 5th. So the chances goes down the first time you try to reach out to them, if they don't reach out, it's like pretty low that you're going to get a response from them. But then if you go 4 or 5 times, and particularly around the 5th time is where you start to get a result back. So I don't have all the data on that exactly, but it's like, I think there's a pretty flawless principle, which I think all people who have been in sales is like, was it 10 times follow up is required? Like most people stop at like 2. There's that graph where the percentage goes really low. So like 6 to 7 follow-ups, not just spam stuff, but that's generally where you can start to book a meeting around that point. That's kind of the benchmark that we go for. So especially some people will always, so I had one guy the other day who I messaged him, or a team messaged him 3 times. Then he went cold, and then I did a post, and then he's obviously been watching the content, and then he reached out to me as well. So that's kind of that, touching back onto that multi-channel, omni-channel, you know, where you're reaching out to people, but then maybe people are just not ready, or just like, I haven't got the time or whatever. And then they come back, you know, 6 months, a year later sometimes. So I think someone said it's like the long game, right? You got to be prepared to play the long game. If you just play short game all the time, you'll lose very quickly. That's from what I've noticed.
And you'll be exhausted because you're starting from scratch every time when you play the short game. You're not building, right? You're always starting from scratch. So every time you get an order and you need to fill that order or whatever it is, you're starting from scratch when you play the short game, and that sucks. It's exhausting. No wonder you burn out. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Let's talk about, well, first of all, here's another comment too from a friend of the show who's been on multiple times, Shannon. Thank you, Shannon. I'll name you. I hope you don't mind that I name you. Concerted efforts will always be a beat, spray, and pray. 100%, right? I mean, that's just, it's so sad that that's not common sense and common practice, but it's true. Especially because now we're competing against new products like all the AI-powered higher tech, which is, to me, I feel like we're almost at the point where anybody who's in staffing has the power to do infinite volume. So it's scary, or not infinite, but so much volume that it's almost useless. You know what I mean? Like, where it's like you could crank out all the posts you want, you can crank out all the outreach while you're asleep and have it reach out to your people. You can, so it's like the kind of grit and powering through numbers that was a big part of hiring people in sales and in recruitment in general, I feel like is gonna get automated fully pretty soon, or at least, you know, augmented by these tools to the point where it's like, well, yeah, of course you're gonna do volume. We have tools for that. do you feel like those, getting into metrics, how do you guys feel about the way the volume metrics are shifting, or just metrics in general? It's a good segue.
Yeah, with metrics, it's tough, because for those of us who started, say, in staffing, and I'm not saying I've been in the industry a very long time, right? I started in 2016, but 2016 to start in staffing was very different than people starting today. I would argue this to anyone. And the structure we had back then, I worked at an organization where volume, of course, is important, but they always held quality at like the highest most important thing, right? Where yes, like you do have to hit all of these, we'll say, volume metrics, but in reality, I would argue like the volume actually wasn't that high because they were pushing quality so much, right? So I think that is something, especially from what you just said, where technically there's an infinite amount of volume any individual person can do if they have the right tool. But if we're still saying, which I am still saying, that in a commoditized market, which labor is absolutely a commoditized market, right? The access to information that other people don't have can only be extracted from long-term relationships. And that's effectively how you can do business, that it creates a barrier to entry where other people can't take it from you, or it's harder to take it from you. That still has to be done with a high level of quality. So if anything, the metrics that are set, of course, have to push people beyond what they would do in their own comfort zone, but not to a point where now your quality of overall outreach and then quality of requirements and quality of everything goes down the drain. So that happy medium point is something that, again, I'm not saying I know everyone in staffing, but from a lot of people that I know, it's something that like they're wrestling with a little bit, because it's a bit of a contrast from where a lot of the big companies were a few years ago. And now, against everything that's happening with AI, there's also other challenges where they have to rethink, okay, if someone doesn't do this, does that automatically mean that they're on a PIP or potentially terminated, right?
Yeah.
If they do the right quality within, X amount of metrics, does that push them enough and get us what we need? That's a conversation that I think a lot of, we'll say, owners are probably having right now. And that's the balance that I think, I don't know if there's one right way to do it, but there might be one right way to do it for a given organization, depending on how they're set up, their culture, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Totally.
I agree with that, Maurizio, around quality. I will also say, I think now, especially with all of the AI tools and automation we have, there are certain metrics that are always going to have more weight than other metrics. The way I look at it with my own sales team, right? The metrics that matter are new client contracts, new job orders, meetings, right? And we work backwards from that. It is easy to crank. I don't want to say easy, but you can crank out 200 calls. You can crank out 200 emails, but you're not going to have 200 meetings, right? So when you're looking at your metrics and you're looking at, am I hitting my sales? I always say, like, I like working backwards on the math and the data. So if you're not hitting your new client contracts, and are you hitting your new client meetings? If you're not hitting your new client meetings, let's look back, because going back to one of your earlier questions, Rick, I think one of the most important questions a sales candidate could ask an organization is, hey, do you know what your conversion rate looks like right now? Like, what's the conversion rate for your current sales team? If you're putting out 100 phone calls, are you getting a 10% connect rate? Maybe, maybe not, and then you got to look at it, because it is a numbers game, the amount of what you're outputting and what you're getting back. Because if you're not closing new contracts, that means you do not have enough meetings. And if you do not have enough meetings, what is it? Do you need to go to more networking events? Do you need to look at what your outreach, and doing all of that? Because I think the beauty of automation nowadays, that when I initially started in staffing, is I remember trying to find tools and technology to tell if my email was opened or not, right?
Yeah.
Now there are so many different platforms where I can see everybody that opened my email, and I can see everyone that maybe took an action to click and book a meeting but didn't complete the action. And that's my hit list, right? That's right there. Okay, I now have people that have brand recognition, because it's sometimes hard to judge from a sales cadence, how many touch points do you put out? with brand recognition, going back to what Nas was saying, if Nike's calling me, I'm going to pick up the phone and see what Nike has to say. And when you have that kind of initial brand recognition from some of those quicker touch points, then you can get up to speed to see, by, average of 5 or 6. Are we going to have a meeting or not? Or are we going to book 15 minutes of your time? Or are we going to talk or what's the value there in the time that I'm expounding onto this? And like I said, kind of going backwards from there on all of your efforts and agreeing with that point on organization, because if you're not organized with any of this in sales, none of it matters.
I think too, it depends on different organizations are in different places with their brand for sure, where it is going to carry more weight or with the maturity of the market, right? So I've had to, in a way, restart the market that I was in from scratch 3 or 4 times throughout my career so far, right? So you build up, you pass off, then you got to start again somewhere else where you don't really have a leg to stand on, right? So in an organization like that, even if the call conversion, for example, isn't super high initially, right? There is something to be said about the salesperson's exposure to the overall market by making a high volume of calls, or taking a candidate to market, as an example, proactively marketing a candidate to a variety of different companies. One piece of advice that I got at the beginning of my career from a senior salesperson was, number one thing, in this market, what you need to do, IT contract staffing, you got to know your companies. You have to know what's happening at all these different companies, because then it doesn't matter. It's okay, I've called this guy 10 times, but I'm going to keep calling them because I know there's 80 different contractors that work on that exact team. At some point, I'm going to get this person and there's going to be action there. Right? If you don't know that, it's easy for people to start to get discouraged and think, oh, why am I hammering the phone? I get this person's voicemail all the time, or I've sent them a bunch of LinkedIn, whatever they decide to do, right? It might be a little bit easier for them to give up, but the more, especially for a new person, the more that they're looking at these companies, more looking at the people who work at these companies, noticing when one manager goes from one place and now they work at this organization, they start to have this market map in their mind that, I don't know, maybe it can be visualized really nicely in some systems, other systems it can't, but they have it in their brain, and that's not something that can be taken away from them as they get successful, as they progress through the organization. That's something that's invaluable, because then that's now passed down to the new people who would effectively join and report to that person without them having to do the exact same thing that person did in order to get to the position that they're in now. So I think there's a lot of direct impact the metrics obviously have on billings and sales and whatnot, but there's a lot of intangibles too when you're trying to grow an organization, that initial output, especially if the market is immature, that it impacts the entire rest of the team and arguably the company, depending on how big the organization actually is.
I think taking a look at this perspective, I think something you said, Rick, was that you can do infinite volume, maybe. But if you've got a smaller market, I think, you have to look for people listening. Maybe they're well, I'm in one vertical and I've only got 5,000 potential buyers.
Right.
Your strategy completely shifts if you've got 500,000 or 5 million. So this is why you see a lot of companies who are, operate horizontally on many different verticals, and they operate in many different industries. They can do the huge volume. They can do millions of emails. Literally, some of these companies are doing millions of emails a month. That's crazy. So that's nearly infinite, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But if your market's smaller, the strategy becomes different. You need to go way high touch, way more personalized. You need to be thinking about. I've got a couple of examples. I forgot about these because I still haven't done account-based sales for a long time. We used to do that for Coca-Cola, and we got trained very well working for Coca-Cola. Stuff that I still have a lot of gratitude for, for many, many years later. And one of the things that they used to do, if they had, we had some of our key accounts, and they would start to build files, like I'm telling on each of their individual, we call them multi-service operators, like people who had multiple businesses. They'd have files this big, what football team they like. This is more getting into once they've closed them, but I still think it's relevant principles. Like what football teams they like, how do they like to be sold to? What buyer type are they? Are they a D energy? Are they a C energy? Are they an S energy? This keeps going, right? But that's an investment. But if your market is small and you're trying to penetrate, these words are more kind of corporate, but you're trying to get into a market that you want to serve, you need to really be looking, take a 50,000 feet view of who are you actually trying to serve here? Who are you trying to get in contact with? and starting at like, how many people have we got at here to actually start to make a connection with? And if they're at networking events, go networking events. If the volume is in LinkedIn messages and they exist on LinkedIn, which most people do, especially the 2025, then LinkedIn's a great strategy. So I really think it's starting at that basis point of actually figuring out. I think a couple of you guys have already mentioned, like, if you want to do business development, you need to have the organizational development around it. Like, how are we going to plan to go forward with our strategy and who we're looking to get in contact with?
Totally. And so that kind of segues into where I was hoping to go in the first place, right? Which is, I feel at speaking to a lot of salespeople who are relatively new, started after COVID and whatever, they are a bit burnt out. I will say that a lot of people seem burnt, right? And so there's an urgency for a couple of things: cash, or to get the hell out of sales. Those are the two urgent things that you see, or to get a quote unquote better sales job. And it feels that it's coming from a place of being kind of burnt out and a little cynical already because it's hard. But I would love to sort of add some nuance to that conversation and get into a little bit about, a lot of people think like they'll start on the comp plan. They'll say like, yeah, I need more money. And it's like, okay, what does that look like for you? And be like, I need a higher base. That's not a great starting point in sales to determine even if it's the right fit for you as a sales job, or if you're going to succeed in it or whatever, right? So comp plans are a lot more nuanced than that, and they favor different styles of sales, right? And different styles of people. And then usually that's tied to job security. People think that having a higher base somehow gives them more security, which in any kind of sales or even like agency recruitment is not true, unless you can really back it up. So you have to be pretty confident to see that those two are connected. They're actually inversely proportional, usually, unless you really have a great network. But I mean, I feel like there's a lot of questions that people could ask to see, like, how am I going to be successful at this sales job, right? Like you were saying, Nas, too, how big a market? What's the approach? Are we going wide, or are we going really specific to a small market? What to sell? Is it that we're cheaper? I can do that. I can convince people that we're cheaper. Or is it that we're more expensive, but we add this? I can do that. You know what? That suits me. I can say, no, we're the elite bespoke one. That suits my character. Like, there's a lot of ways you can think about, do I fit in here? And when I show up every day, am I going to be able to be a pretty genuine person and also sell? Because if you're going against who you are as a person, you're going to burn right out and you're not going to be successful. I feel like those things are much more important even than what's the base, how many days in office am I? You know what I mean? How are you guys feeling about that? Like, determining whether or not, from the person applying, it's a good opportunity for them, a good sales opportunity, and even vice versa on the sales manager side, that they're a good fit for your sales job.
The transparency there, I think, is going to vary between managers, between different organizations, on what they can really tell the people who are applying, the people who are asking for raises. For me, I'm very transparent in that even as a salesperson who's not managing a P&L, you will absolutely understand profitability and what that means for me as a manager who gets bonused, what that means for our company, so our shareholders too, and what it means for them, what they're trying to achieve. And that's all connected, right? So regardless if it's warranted or not, I love salespeople who ask for more money, because I love that, right? I'm not going to shy away from that. I would never get mad at someone for asking me for more money. That's crazy, right? For me, it's more getting them to understand, like, if you want that, it's not that it's impossible, but like, this is where we have to be in order for us to be able to finance that, right? And you can use real life examples where you've seen it, right? Like, sales maybe isn't super great, and then you start to see back office, for example, get a little bit thin, right? It's no individual salesperson's fault, but it's a sales organization's fault because they're not doing enough to sustain, say, the organization as it was. So making sure that the salespeople understand the implications of their job, the rewards if they are successful, and if they're sustainably successful, and what that also means, the repercussions if they're not. And I think, I don't want to say it's a rule of thumb, but for me, whenever I'm interviewing someone who's new to the organization, I pretty much give them every possible reason why they shouldn't do this, just because it's not for everyone. Yeah. And I'm very confident in why I'm happy to be in this job, in this industry, and why I've stayed here for 10 years. But I really need you to understand why this may not be right for you. Not just this type of sales job, not just sales in general, but like even our organization. right? Our organization, smaller boutique, it's been around, for 40 years, but we're less than 100 people, right? I come from an organization where there's thousands. Everything is cookie cutter, and it's great for a different reason, but there are differences. So depending on where the person comes from, I'm always trying to paint that picture. So at the end of it, it's cool. We can stay in touch, no problem at all. But like, I really want to make sure that if you want to do this, it's not like, let's explore and see how it goes. You're pretty confident, and I'm pretty confident that this is going to work. And if it's not, no big deal, right? We save each other tons of time and tons of money in the end.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also too love taking it back to some of the behavioral interviewing questions that we love to implement for our clients. I look at that with our own internal interviewing, and kind of going back to, whether they're a passive candidate, quietly looking, whether they're an active candidate, what's their motivating factor? Like, what's the why, right? Like, keep it simple. Why us? Why our organization? Sometimes the best salespeople can sell me, but maybe that doesn't always translate to clients, but that's a whole other thing. But just being able to explain what's the why for this role, why are they interested? And if they give you a very basic reason, I ask why again, and I'll keep asking until I get the answer that I want. If they're like, oh, Spherion just seems like such a great organization. Okay, well, why do you think we're a great organization?
Right.
Have they done their homework into the job that they're interviewing for? And then another question that I took from a client of ours, that it's a really, interesting way to see how they would describe themselves from a character standpoint, is, what would your best friend say about you? Like, I know if someone asked me that question, I would be able to kind of say something right off the bat. It kind of breaks down some barriers to be a little bit more authentic and genuine. And you can also be able to say, if your first thing is laughing and saying, I'm a hothead, or I'm a loyal person, or whatever comes out of that, you have to make the most of the time that you're investing interviewing these people. And on the resume, it's easy to see skill sets or technology used. And okay, that's great. Salesforce, wonderful. But, how can I be able to understand whether or not, this is going to be the right fit? And I think it's really just kind of getting into some of those character questions to uncover, are they going to, be able to sustain for the long term? And if they're able to offer references right off the bat confidently, and I think of that with clients I work with that are in an industry, like steel, and I'm like, oh, I can give you a reference for another steel company we worked with. I can confidently say, I can give you this client's information. And I think when a candidate can lead confidently with that, that they didn't burn bridges. Mm-hmm. And if they're able to be honest to say, well, I was let go for performance reasons, or I was let go due to, leaning out the organization. That's going to come back to references. And I always use that as a benchmark on my own side, because I will say this to candidates all day long after the fact. If you get me your references the same day, that's amazing, or the next day. But if you're dragging your feet and there's some hesitation there, that means you don't have a lot of people to vouch for you. And if you're an entry-level college grad, I mean, I'm sure you've worked in retail or in the restaurant. There must be someone somewhere along the road that could vouch and say, Rick is an awesome person, and here's why you should give him a shot. And that speaks volumes.
And also preparedness. Like, you should figure, if someone's going to ask you for references, if you go through the whole process and then you have no references at the end, you start looking for references after your third interview, it's probably not a very prepared way of going about your job.
Absolutely. Being prepared across, doing your homework on the organization. If they've never been to our website, that right there is a red flag. And then, like you said, knowing that references are going to be a part of it. And in sales, being confident in the product, AKA yourself, that is going to be, instrumental in guiding what next steps look like.
I think it's kind of shocking that they're hearing it, because I'm not in recruitment, right? That people wouldn't be prepared. I just think this would be a given. But I guess
you'd be shocked, Naz.
I'm sure. I'm already starting to get a bit of unveil the curtain, so to speak. But from like, if I'm ever hearing someone who wants more money in any, from even developers or anyone who works in an organization that I'm operating, it's like, well, cool. There's got to be a direct proponent to some of that money has to actually come from somewhere. So if you're going to provide value, so I think sales is the most easiest structure. It's like, you get your base, And obviously that base is simply there just to sustain you. That's sales. You know, I was told Coca-Cola, well, I was making more than the sales managers because I delivered more value to the company than the sales managers did. But they were in a higher position, higher base, but my bonuses were bigger. But that's what the risk that you do is when you're in sales. I think people who aren't in sales, so people who are in sales should have that as like a mental frame of like, sure, I can earn less some months, but other months I can earn more. And the base is just there to not let that desperation creep in, because we all know what happens when you start to feel a little bit desperate. You need to make the sale, you blow it, you lose it. That energy comes across. So I think with metrics and comp structures, talking from more of a smaller business perspective, it's like they should know very clearly how they can make more money. And that base salary should be dependent on, cool, like they can get the lowest possible base, higher commission, more commission, less base. I think you can work out something that's favorable to your company, but they should be handsomely rewarded to the value that they bring. If they're bringing 3, 4, 5x, why wouldn't they get more money? Unless there are some greedy companies. I'm sure I hear it from many different people, that people that don't want to pay, and that's fine. You get a good reputation, and then 18 months later you move on to a company who does value that, because there's many companies who want to sustain good people, good salespeople, good people in general. I used to say to my brother, is one of these guys, he's amazing at what he does, but he's always got like bad job security. I'm like, bro, you're like amazing. Good people will always be needed. Just remember that. And you're one of the good people. You're on time. You do all the basics, all those basics that we've talked about, right? If you do that, it's so easy to stand out in the market, in the job market, in the business market, and all of those aspects. If you just do the basics really well, you'll be fine. You'll be more than fine.
There was this thing that so you guys made me think of this, actually, each of you, and what you were saying. There's this thing where in my first agency, one of the more senior people was giving coaching on cover letters. He was like, your candidates don't need to write a cover letter. You're their cover letter, right? That you're an agency recruiter. So that's the thing. But if they insist on writing a cover letter, make sure it's good. And I was like, well, what do you mean, like spelling grammar? He's like, obviously spelling grammar, but if they don't have a computer, that's a problem, right? If they have a computer, spelling grammar should be a given. But he's like, the resume is, he put it, I'm paraphrasing, but it was pretty eloquent at the time. I'll murder it probably. But he's like, the resume, it showcases why you are good for the job. The cover letter should show why this position is right for you. So it should show understanding, why are you excited about it? Like you were saying, Aisha, like what's your why? Like, this is perfect for me because where I see myself in the future is blah, or I really feel like I'll thrive more in an organization that's more like this. And if you're a salesperson, I feel like that's your sales pitch in a way to the company, is why is this right for you? And all the questions people are, I'm like, what kind of questions do you want to ask them? Oh yeah, we'll ask them about the vacation and how much in the office and whatever else. It's like, Jesus Christ, right? Like, you should be asking them, what's their sales cycle? How many people are involved? What kind of fee sizes do they have? Who are their clients? What's their fill ratio? Like, there's a million things you can ask, right? How big is the pool? There's a million things you can ask about how they do the sales. And I think that it's fair to walk away from opportunities and be like, yeah, no, I tried that before. I'm no good at it. It's fair, like you said, to admit things. I was let go doing something similar. It's just not my style of sales, right? But if you don't ever even find out if what they do or think about that stuff, you're going to be stressed and doomed kind of forever out there. So like, how do you guys feel about the assessment of, you know what I mean? The assessment of a sales opportunity for a certain person. Do you feel like people are asking you those questions as sales managers and getting to like, or is that kind of, am I nuts in saying that that's kind of a dead art of really evaluating in a job interview to you, the hiring manager, if it's going to be a good fit for them as a salesperson?
On the first meeting, I would say not always. The first time we meet, sometimes I'm surprised with some very, very good questions, but I mean, and not every company is going to be able to do this, but for me in the position I'm in, I pretty much like only hire in October for our team. So even a year in advance, I'll be speaking to people who I think maybe could be a good fit for that time slot. Time slot doesn't work out, no problem. There's tons of other people who can do the job, right? But using that time to have those meetings, I've found that the questions start to get better and better and better. Some people end up ruling themselves out. Some people, we remain engaged. Some people, okay, maybe that start date's not great, but we can look at it at a different time. But for me, and again, maybe it's just it works for me, the more time I have with the person, right? Even if initially it's casual, but the more time I have, the better questions I think both of us end up asking, and the better fit the role is confirmed or is not confirmed in the end. So if under a time constraint, I would say a lot less is surfaced, but the more time I give myself, I would say most of that stuff we get to the bottom of it, which has been really helpful.
Yeah. I agree with that. And I will say too, in the ecosystem of hiring, whether you're the salesperson / candidate, whether you're the recruiter, whether you're the hiring manager, we all expect questions to be asked at some point in the interview process, whether you're going into it as the interviewee or the interviewer. The candidate needs to have questions to ask. And it doesn't matter if you have 1 year of experience or 20 years of experience. Putting together some thoughtful questions that are not about PTO and in office scheduling is, I think, is imperative. And I will say, Rick, it is not a lost art, because my best salesperson, my most recent hire, he asked very thoughtful questions. And if you don't know the right questions to ask, like, hey, there's this thing called AI that'll tell you what questions do I need to ask as a sales candidate in this role. So again, I think that just comes down to being prepared and doing your research and knowing how you want to come into it. And yeah, I agree with Maurizio. In the first conversation, you may not uncover all of that, but you can uncover some of it, because again, we all know towards the end of a conversation, if you're not inserting it throughout and sprinkling your questions in at the end, do you have any questions? No. Well, you don't have any questions. You're obviously not that engaged with this role. And if you have some questions that are relevant to this role, then you will have piqued my interest in knowing that I want to continue on in the process.
Yeah, I think, I don't do recruitment, so I can't talk to that side from a hiring, but obviously I've hired people in that part. But I'm always looking for people who, like the others have said, who are asking insightful questions or showing, I think it's initiative, right? I think that's the only thing that I really care about when I'm talking to pretty much anyone, because I think initiative is such an underrated skill set or mindset. I'm not sure exactly, or characteristic, because if they take initiative to think about, like, do some research about the company, do some research about the direction or things that, like, everything is online. Everything. You can access everything. I think others said, like, you could just go on AI and find out a 47-page report about that company, even if it's a small company, if they've got a LinkedIn presence or they've got a social media presence, it all exists. So just to pull some of those things together and say, like, what is it, things that you guys are, like, what's your vision for the company? Where do you guys see the guy going? Are you guys entering into these markets? Have you thought about this? What tools are you using? Like, the basics, I think is always a good benchmark. But I would love to see more people take more risks in asking those questions, like actually saying, like, bold questions. I remember when I was in the job market, when I was a long time ago now, but I would, like, print off, like, the sheet of their share price. I don't know why I thought that was relevant information, but it sounded like a good idea at the time. And I would like figure out, like, where, who are they? Are they a subsidiary of this company? Like, a bit of initiative. I didn't think I was the smartest person in the world, but just someone who could think about, okay, if I ever got asked a question, I would be aware, or I would have a bit of an edge over someone else, because at the end of the day, you're competing with other people in the job market. My girlfriend, she recently got a job, and there's a small talent pool here in Cyprus. I was telling her, like, there's probably only 40 people. You only have to beat those 40 people, like, in this particular role. Like, and I'm not that she got the job in the end, but this like, you're competing in that job market. So if you can stand out, maybe you guys are hiring hundreds, you're getting thousands of candidates for some particular sales roles, but how can you stand out in that interview, I think, is what people should be thinking about.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a disappointment factor, because sometimes you'll see a great resume or someone who seems like they have great presence, but then they come in. This is why I wanted to talk about the metrics and comp element. I actually feel like I'll bring a quick anecdote here. Aisha, you mentioned Julie Robinson, who's the co-founder of Raymond George, and having worked with her too.
I love Julie. Shout out to Julie.
Shout out to Julie, exactly.
She's my origin story.
Yeah, and mine in Rec to Rec late in life. quite late in life when I started working with her for 6 years ago. I'd already done a lot of different things, and somehow no one had ever said this phrase to me. And she said this with regard to like trying to get me to understand comp plans from the top down and not from the bottom up. And she had said, well, there isn't really such a thing as a base salary though, right? And I was just kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, blew my mind, because in sales, I always thought of, and my sales jobs that I had, maybe I just wasn't really trying hard because I was trying to be a rock star back when I was young and taking sales jobs, while doing the music thing. But at the same time, the metrics didn't seem realistic to me. So the base salary seemed like, well, that's what I'm going to make, right? And then there's 3 guys who are hitting all kinds of bonus out of 50, you know what I mean? So most people are not getting this comp that they're promising. So it was demotivating in a way, because it didn't feel like the metrics were realistic to me. That was my experience in Montreal and doing different sales jobs and whatever that maybe weren't like the best sales jobs. And Montreal was a tough market back then, 24 plus years ago. But it was a tough market back then after the referendum and stuff. But I mean, like, I think that's having achievable metrics though. There kind of is no such thing as base salary or draw or whatever else, right? It's more psychological. And yes, on a very short timeline of when you first start the job, it's relevant to put money in your pocket. But whether you call something a base salary, a draw, or a guaranteed commission is another thing people will do to sort of help bridge the gap for your first few months. At the end of the day, her point was, you have to sell, you have to make sales, or you will be fired, right? So the question is, what do I need to do? How big are these sales? Are these metrics achievable? And then the bigger question is, what piece of the pie of the profitability do I get to take home? And that kind of varies, right? That's a much more important way of thinking and evaluating sales opportunity now that I can see better, more clearly from the other side of it. But I feel like that's a message that hasn't really reached a lot of young salespeople. They seem to be where I was before meeting Julie, which was feeling metrics are not really attainable. They're going to promise me the world, but I'm not really going to make commission. You know what I mean? Do you guys get a sense of that? How do you feel about the metric attainability out there right now?
For a new salesperson, though, I think in a way it's understandable, unless they know people in sales and they've seen what like people can actually achieve, right? Of course, like when I first went into sales after university, right? I've always been the type of I've always had a job since I was like 12 years old, right? It was never a commission job. It was the harder you work, the more hours you do, the more you get paid. That's all I knew. Right?
Hours, yeah.
So yeah, just hours, right?
Yeah.
Hours of time, you get paid. That's all I knew. When I got my first sales job, I was like, okay, this is a job it's a salary job. I got benefits. I'll do whatever they ask me to do. You want this many calls a day? I'll call. You want me to take all these people for lunch? I'll do that. I don't care. That's all I knew at the time. But then I start to see, okay, there are people in this organization that are making like serious money, and it's not just 1 or 2 people, right? They're doing. Their behaviors are leading them to go to where they are now, right? So that's an image that I always had in my mind, even when I moved on to different organizations where the setup wasn't the same, right? Where there maybe weren't as many top performers, or even those top performers weren't doing the numbers that some of these guys were doing before. So for people who I see come in now, or even people who I worked with later in life, they don't have those like examples cemented in their mind. I'm talking like someone specific, someone's name, or like one day I can be like that person. It's on the managers to really show them what that path looks like. They have to come their end, which is like Nas was saying, initiative, work ethic, right? There's no entitlement in sales, and they have to show that they have that initiative, they have that work ethic. It's on us to kind of like go our half and sort of show them that path where it's like, upon doing this, if you're successful, this is where you can be. If you get there, this is that next step on, and sort of give them that vision, right? And then their mind will do the rest, I believe. But we got to kind of expect that, I think, in the beginning. Not everyone's going to come in with that type of foresight. If you do, fantastic. You got a winner on your hands. But it just, what can you expect, right? What can you teach?
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. I always say too, there's no ego in sales. And you're absolutely right, Mauricio. It's on the hiring manager. It's on the manager to help explain these are why the metrics are relevant. And I think it's even more impactful if they can show that real life example of either like, I went through and I achieved these metrics and this is what the outcome was, or here's a senior salesperson that went through and achieved it. Because again, when we talk about goal setting and metrics, yes, you want it to be realistic, but you also want there to be, a certain drive behind it. And if they can feel that from their manager or from the team or even finding so to speak, a mentor kind of within the colleagues to come in and say, look at Rick. This is what Rick did. Be like Rick. And to be like Rick, you can do X, Y, and Z to get there. And that's why I think it's so helpful from a managerial standpoint to have walked that walk that you talk. And if you haven't, and if you maybe came into your, role from a different angle as a business owner or as a founder and entrepreneur, to be able to lean on some real life examples to give these newbies to say, this is why the metrics matter. This is not just a bunch of hot smoke I'm blowing. You'll get to X by doing this.
Yeah, it's a really cool, interesting conversation, because I'm getting a lot of different ideas as you guys are talking. Is that, some people may get some, like, I think for a new salesperson to think they're going to get like the basis to sustain them. But for a new salesperson, if it's their first year and they're not committing to like sales as like a career or like something they're going to do for 5 to 10 years, then I'm worried if they ever make commission, because I think it does take a long time, depending if you like, it always industry dependent and like what you're selling. Obviously, if you're talking about recruitment, it's different again. But if you could be in a particular region that is very, very profitable, so for example, like I was working in the past, and there were certain different districts, but one district was just, they had more money to spend on these products. You're in an area which they just don't have as much money. So you're kind of already disadvantaged, and maybe you can get some salespeople can get disillusioned with that, because be like Rick, but Rick's getting all the top customers. You're giving me all these guys. So I think there's that, like, you have to earn those stripes as well at times. I think from someone who has been in that situation is like, well, that's not fair. But how do I then have that conversation with my manager or someone to say, hey, I want to get more into with these type of customers, or what do I need to do to kind of get into this particular role? Because not all sales roles are made equal. Like, there's some sales role which are purely new business development, and then you hand off to the account manager and happy days. And that's a great role, because you just can focus on selling. Some roles you're hybrid, you're doing account based, and then you have to bring in a certain amount of new customers. You have to then take those customers and then grow that base into more products or different solutions or whatever it may be. So I really think it does depend on having that conversations all the way through. But I totally agree. If you've got good, successful stories in front of you that can show you the path, and like someone can kind of put their arm around you and say, hey, this is where we're going, I think it makes a much better cohesive team environment, and will really help that person to kind of grow and develop whatever their goals are. Hopefully they want to stay in that role for a good period of time at least.
Well, there you go. And somehow we're out of time. I wish this was a Joe Rogan style thing where we could go for 4.5 hours and just like solve all the world's problems. But thank you very much for being here, you guys. We'll have to do it all again. If you're willing to come back, we can
this is awesome. Thank you.
Dive more in. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting him.
Great meeting you all.
Likewise.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for anybody who's been listening to us live. If you're listening to us, if you'd like to listen to this after the fact and you're just catching the end, you can actually find us anywhere you find your podcasts. In fact, if you listen to podcasts somewhere and you don't find Recruiting EQ, send me a message, because I will fix that. And hope to see you all next Wednesday. Thanks.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao, guys.